Ms. Graham.
Good morning, Mr. Graves.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to turn to something else. You gave evidence in November 2022 to the inquiry. And when you gave evidence, you'll hopefully recall that I asked you to consider matters through the prism of a hypothetical reasonable officer. And I asked you about a particular set of circumstances and what a hypothetical reasonable officer may do in those circumstances. And I've returned to that again to some extent this week when we've been looking at training. So I don't want to repeat any of that evidence. Obviously the Chair has your evidence from November 2022 and he has your evidence this week. But it was agreed that there'd be a range of possible options for a hypothetical reasonable officer to take in any given set of circumstances. So, but what I'd like to ask you is about your contact with the Crown previously and the approach that the Crown took in relation to asking you questions.
Yes.
So you know that's the hypothetical reasonable officer's approach I have taken.
Yes.
In November 22 and this week. And I'd like to look at the approach the Crown took with you. Now, as background, to refresh your memory to some extent, could we look first of all, please, at COPFS 02126A. Now, this is a briefing note, and you will not have seen this briefing note as part of your work, but it's a useful way of just reminding everyone of the context. And the inquiry itself has heard evidence from a number of witnesses about this note. So it's, as you'll see, it's a briefing note by Alistair MacLeod, and I understand you know Alistair MacLeod.
Mr. MacLeod was the first contact I had back in the end of 2017 requesting my assistance. Yeah.
And we've heard that he was a senior Procurator Fiscal Deputy involved in the investigation into the death of Mr. Bio.
At that time he was, yes, and I say copied in Fiona Khan, and she was also involved in part of that, and was the other contact I had within the Crown Office.
Thank you. And this is dated 28th February 2020, but to reassure you, I think if we look at the top paragraph, this is to detail and timeline, if we can move up, the work carried out by a department within Crown Office against criminal allegations against the police between the 3rd of May 2015, which was the date of Mr. Bio's death, and the 11th of November 2019, when the Victims' Right of Review, called VRR, process concluded.
Yes.
So it covers the whole period between May 2015 and November 2019.
That's correct, yes.
And so I'd like to first of all look at page 13, please. And this specifically deals with what they've called the OST expert, so the Officer Safety Training Expert. And my understanding is that that was you.
That would be correct, yes.
So here we are. You'll see that the Crown encountered considerable difficulty in identifying a suitable OST expert, and a number of inquiries were made in England and Northern Ireland. And then in December 2017, the Met Police College in Hendon was approached for assistance, and they weren't able to put forward any of their own officers, but they provided details of a known and trusted former training officer, Martin Graves, who was now operating as an OST expert in the private sector.
That's correct, yeah.
And we've heard that that's how the Crown initially came into contact with you and got your name. And they contacted you on the 19th of December 2017, and initially provided you with general, non-specific details about the case. And the following day, you forwarded your CV to the Crown and confirmed you would be in a position to start reviewing materials and provide a report to them. And does that accord with your recollection?
Yes, that would be the correct dates and the first process, yes.
And then following Crown Council's agreement, Mr. Graves was formally asked to provide a report on the 22nd of December 2017. and you were contacted by telephone on the 8th of January 2018, and you were provided with specific details about the case.
Yes, and just after that, the materials arrived on a pen drive, complete with a copy of written instructions, yes.
And indeed it says in the briefing note, a detailed letter of instruction and pen drive was couriered to Mr Graves' business address on the 24th of January 2018. And you remember receiving
Yes.
that. Can I ask you to look at COPFS 00008? And this should be your letter of instruction. So it's from Crown Office dated the 24th of January 2018. Do you have a hard copy in your folder?
I do, yeah.
Well, excellent. And that's, I think it's around a 20-page document.
Yeah, I remember it being quite substantial.
And we've also got a copy of it on the screen, but we will only see a section of that. But do you recognise that as the letter of instruction?
I do, yes. It also detailed all the documents that were contained on the pen drive, which also included a great deal of CCTV and also a reconstruction of the scene and the timeline that had been done by forensic scientists.
Thank you. Now, I will be coming back to that later to ask you some more detailed questions shortly. But again, just to complete the context and the background, can we return to the briefing note, please? So that's COPFS 02126A, and we were on page 13 under OST Expert. And it talks about the original materials. If we can carry on down, there we are. The original materials provided to Mr Graves in January included documentation in relation to the training delivered to the material officers. On the 21st of February 2018, Mr Graves was advised by email that PERC had carried out further inquiries in relation to the nature and content of officer training, and a further letter of instruction and materials was being prepared. And then on the 22nd of February that year, 2018, Mr Graves advised the Crown he'd not been able to devote time to preparing his report at that time. Could you look please at COPFS 00008 and page 9, please? So we're going to go back to the now, so page 9, please, of COPFS 00008. Right, I think my copy is slightly different. So what I was looking for was the next letter of instruction that was sent to you, which I have attached, and it was a letter dated 22nd of February 2018, and I had it following on from the first letter of instruction.
Yeah, it would be page 10, it's the next page.
Yes, you have the same copy as me. Oh, there we are. Excellent, thank you. So that's 22nd of February 2018, and this appears to be a second letter of instruction sent to you by the Crown, referring to the first letter of instruction on the 24th of January, and various materials were sent, and they've since received further relevant information. So that was, do you recognise that?
Yes, there was additional materials provided, yes.
Lovely. And then I wonder if we could go back to the briefing note, please. And that's COPFS 02126A. And if we can look at page 9. Sorry, we were on page 13. Apologies. And we come to, if we can move down the page, there we are, and it then talks about a second letter of instruction, materials couriered on that 24th February, and asked to do your report. And there was a comment that Precognosers were aiming to submit their report to the Crown Council on the 23rd of March 2018. And on the 7th of March, you confirmed your report would be completed. And then on the 16th of March, you advised the Crown that you had been unable to play a number of titles on the SPA multimedia presentation disc. So you were having some difficulties with
There
the
were some
pen
technical
drive.
difficulties with the formatting, yes.
And in the end, a further disc was couriered to you in March.
Yes, that's correct.
And then on the 16th of March, the Precognosers, and we've heard that those were Fiona Carnan and Alistair MacLeod, who you've mentioned.
Yes.
Made arrangements with Mr. Graves to discuss his emerging conclusions over the telephone on the 21st of March. And this was with a view to finalising the report that they were preparing to Crown Council by the 23rd of March. Then if we can move on, please, go down the page. And it said here, although the consultation with Mr. Graves was very useful, he advised the Crown's report would not be completed until April. And so they did not submit a report to Crown Office until they had received your report.
Yes. From memory, the telephone conversation, I asked if we could break down the questions, and they added actually further questions verbally in relation to clarification, which again extended the work that was going to be required. So I gave a revised timeline for the completion of the review.
And it says there you asked for further time in April, and then the OST report was received by the Crown on the 14th of April 2018.
That would sound about right, yes.
And it was examined in detail. So let's have a look at COPFS 00024. And do we see here your name at the top, instructed by Mr. Alistair MacLeod?
Yes.
And the date of the report is the 13th of April 2018. And if we move down the first page, we see that it is the use of force by police in the restraint of Mr. Shekubayo. And then it says expert witness, report of Mr. Martin Graves. And we can see that on the screen.
Yes.
And do you recognise that report?
Yes.
And I think I asked you questions in connection with this in November 2022.
That's correct. This is what I referred to, yes.
Thank you. We will come back to that, and I'll ask you some further questions in due course. Could we go back to the briefing note, please? Again, I think we were now on page 14. And where we were just finished reading, the OST report was received on the 14th of April 2018. And there were a number of typos and such like, where there always are with these things. And a number of matters were raised, and you resolved those, and then your draft had been submitted as your final report on the 29th of April 2018.
That's correct, yes.
And then it says that you were precognosed by the precognosers at Paisley Fiscal's office on the 11th of May 2018.
Yes, that was an in-person meeting, yes.
And that was in Paisley?
Yes.
And you remember that taking place?
Yes, I remember flying up, yeah.
Right. And it says the precognosers, do you remember who attended that?
From memory, it was Miss Carnan and Mr. MacLeod, from memory.
Yes. Thank you. And the inquiry has the precognition that was taken from you, and I know you won't have seen that, but it does indicate that both Fiona Carnan's initials and Alistair MacLeod's initials are on that, and they were both there as far as you remember.
As far as I remember, yes.
Thank you. And then you won't be necessarily aware of this, Mr. Graves, but the inquiry has information and has been advised that on the 15th of August 2018, the Lord Advocate, the then Lord Advocate, James Wolfe KC, instructed Senior Crown Counsel to consult with you as the restraint expert. And Senior Crown Counsel at that time was the Assistant Principal Crown Counsel, who was Ashley Edwards, KC. And do you remember meeting with Ashley Edwards?
I remember coming to Edinburgh for another meeting, yes. I have a different name on the email, but I believe.
Well, we have, if we could look perhaps at COPFS 02337, and we've heard evidence that this is the consultation note that was taken. We've heard evidence that Les Brown, head of the criminal allegations against the police and Crown Office, had a consultation at Scottish House Embankment in London on the 20th of August 2018. And that was attended by the allocated and Assistant Principal Crown Counsel, the allocated AD, Ashley Edwards. And that seems to have been in London in August.
Yes, there was a meeting in London, and I've also flown up to Edinburgh as well.
Right. And I want to try and pin down the dates when you attended and met with Crown Counsel and Crown Office. So you've told us that you remember meeting Fiona Carnan and Alistair MacLeod in Paisley?
Yes.
And was that on one occasion in Paisley?
One occasion, and I think it was May of that year.
Right. And the notes appear to say that was the 11th of May. And then the next meeting you had, who was that with?
I remember Les Brown's name. As I said, I've looked back over my email trail from that time. Les Brown, and I remember a young lady being there, but I can't remember her name.
And we've heard that it was, you'll see the names on the screen, Ashley Edwards, QC then, KC now, and Les Brown.
Yes.
And that meeting with them was in London on the 20th of August.
Yes, it's Scottish House, yes.
And was that the first time that you had met either Ashley Edwards or Les Brown?
I believe it was, yes. I'd corresponded with Les via email, but it was the first face-to-face meeting I'd had with him.
Right. So the information that the inquiry has been sent is that on the 15th of August 2018, the then Lord Advocate instructed Senior Crown Counsel to consult with you, Martin Graves, and then it would appear 5 days later, on the 20th of August, there was a consultation with you. And we're then aware that the VRR, Victims' Right of Review, was intimated in February 2019. We've heard evidence about that. And concluded, which we saw in the first paragraph of the briefing note, 11th of November 2019. And during that period, am I to understand that you had another consultation, and that was perhaps in Edinburgh?
I have recollection of coming to the Crown offices in Edinburgh, yes.
And if I was to say, could we look at COPFS 02332? Now, these are consultation notes, which you wouldn't have seen before, I don't think, but they do indicate that they're Alistair MacLeod and Fiona Carnan notes on AP consultation with Martin Graves, OST expert, 28th June 2019, Crown Office, Edinburgh. And it's my understanding that AP is Alec Prentice, now KC. So that's 00529. So you see there the statement of James Wolfe, KC, and I'm interested in paragraph 52, please. You'll have seen the heading go by about expert witnesses, and what he has told the chair is that he'd looked at email exchanges between himself and the Assistant Principal Crown Counsel in December 2017 in relation to the identification of a suitably qualified restraint expert, in which I suggested that inquiries might be made with police forces elsewhere in the UK and with police training institutions north and south of the border. Otherwise, so far as I can recall, I had no personal involvement in the matters referred to in this question. And is it fair to say you never met with the Lord Advocate?
I have no recollection of meeting with him, no.
And these were all matters for the investigative team under the direction of Assistant Principal Crown Counsel, who we've heard was Ashley Edwards at the time. And as I have already noted, when I received APCC's report, that's Ashley Edwards, with her recommendation in relation to prosecution of the officers, I had a discussion with her which resulted in further consultation with a restraint expert before a final decision was taken. I cannot now recall the specific point upon which I considered that further work was required. Now, we've heard evidence that Ashley Edwards was the allocated Advocate Depute, that she prepared, in fact, a number of reports for the then Lord Advocate, James Wolfe, that the first one she sent to the Lord Advocate, and we've heard evidence they had a meeting. And it would appear that after Mr. Wolfe had a discussion with her, it resulted in further consultation with a restraint expert before a final decision was to be taken. But he could not recall the specific point on which he considered further work was required. And I wondered whether you had any recollection at all of discussing with Ashley Edwards what in particular the Lord Advocate was interested in.
I remember both of the meetings being not directly related to the original instructions and the original questions, and asking for more of my opinion, overarching opinion in relation to the incident, and also some additional questions around the training which hadn't formed part of my original instructions. I do remember discussing other topics and other things which were outside of my original instructions from them.
Thank you. Now, as far as the inquiry are aware, you were the only OST expert or safety training expert, restraint expert that was instructed by the Crown and invited to comment on the actions of officers. Do you have any information to suggest that wasn't you that was the only expert on this?
I'm not aware. I wasn't informed that another expert was being approached. No.
Thank you. So, as far as you knew, you were the only expert being consulted with on this matter?
Yes. Normal practice would be if there's more than one expert, the experts would be requested to meet and come up with a joint report in relation to their findings, identifying areas of agreement and areas of disagreement.
And there was never anything like that?
No.
Thank you. So I'd like to go back to the letter of instruction and ask you one or two questions. That was COPFS 00008. And you said earlier that you recognised that letter of instruction. It was of some length. And I'd like to look at page 2, please. And at the top of this page, you'll see a section in bold. And I'm going to read out the first part of that to you and then ask you some questions on it. I please either follow your own hard copy or we can look at it on the screen. Given your expertise, the Crown wished to instruct you to prepare a report commenting on the actions of police from the point of engagement with Mr. Bayo, and particularly providing opinion on whether the method of engagement with and restraint of the deceased by officers was reasonable and justifiable, taking into account the requirement for their use of force to be necessary, accountable, proportionate, legal and ethical. In general, in providing your opinion, please comment on whether the officers concerned seem to have followed their OST training. We would ask that you consider all of the materials supplied to you in reaching your opinion. Could you explain your understanding of what it was that the Crown were asking you to express an opinion on?
The actions of the officers, the tactics that were deployed, and whether or not, in my opinion, I deemed them to be appropriate to the risk, and also whether that those tactics were in line with their current training.
Where we see the section that says, we wish to instruct you to prepare a report at the beginning of the paragraph, commenting on the actions of police from the point of engagement with Mr. Bio, and they say they'd like an opinion on whether the method of engagement with and restraint of the deceased by officers was reasonable. What was your understanding of that phrase?
Whether their actions were appropriate to the proposed or the perceived threat. Was it the right thing to do? And if it was the right thing to do, did they do it in the right way?
And was it ever your understanding that they wanted you to express an opinion on whether the restraint was reasonable?
Yes.
Then can we look at the second paragraph in bold? I should mention that we may ask for a supplementary report from you at a later stage about the efficacy of the police OST training. Now, we don't have a report like that in the inquiry, and I wanted to ask you, were you ever subsequently asked to prepare that report for the Crown?
I never prepared a secondary or supplementary report. As I said, from memory, I do remember answering questions in relation to the training at one or other of the two meetings that I had with Crown Office.
And do you remember whether it was the meeting with Ashley Edwards or the meeting with Alec Prentice?
I can't recall. I don't have any personal notes of those meetings still available.
Were you ever asked to look at, I know you were looking at some training materials, when you compare what the inquiry have asked you to look at in terms of training materials and the questions that you were asked to respond to regarding training in 2015 and up to date, do you remember if it was a comparable process at the meetings you had?
I was certainly given access to sections of the 2013 manual. I remember having seen that because I had that on record already, and being given a number, 2 or 3 PowerPoints, supporting PowerPoints. I don't remember seeing any lesson plans or anything like that, or any other supporting documents. Right. I definitely had the manual, and I definitely had a couple of supporting PowerPoints.
So your comments were restricted perhaps to the manual itself and the couple of PowerPoints you saw? Yes,
I remember also making comment on the spells, the first aid training. I was given a copy of that as part of the training material. So I remember giving a couple of paragraphs of comment on that as well.
And do you remember any specific questions that were asked about training?
Not off the top of my head, no. If they're not involved in those documents, then no.
Do you remember what either of the PowerPoints related to?
One, as I said, one was a supporting OST PowerPoint. I can't remember what the other ones were.
And when you say supporting, was that to do with the manual?
Yes, it was the basic delivery methodology for the manual content.
All right, thank you. Could we move on to your back to your letter of instruction, and I'd like to look at pages 7 to 8 and a section that is called restraint on the ground. And it's towards the bottom of page, if you look at page 7, there we are. So we'll start on page 7. You see the section that says restraint on the ground?
Yeah.
And was it, before I go through the detail of this section, was it ever explained to you by the Crown that it appeared from the eyewitness evidence that there were different factual versions emerging of what actually happened in Hayfield Road. And they could not all be true and accurate, but different witnesses had said different things, and that it would not be for you to make up your mind which version you preferred.
Yes, I took into consideration I had access to all the witness statements, so I used those to blend and look at the timeline to make formulate my own opinions.
Thank you. Can we look at the final paragraph on page 7? The Snapchat footage taken by witness Wise, and I know you're familiar with the Snapchat footage. We discussed it with you in November 2022. Yes. The Snapchat footage taken by witness Wise, inserted at 1 minute 1 second into the restraint, contains a brief glimpse of the methods of restraint being used at that time. 6 officers are in various positions on or around the now deceased. From that Snapchat footage, it appears Mr. Byle was lying on the southern pavement on Hayfield Road, surrounded by 5 police officers, namely PC Smith, PC Tomlinson, PC Payton, PC Gibson and PC McDonough. A 6th officer, believed to be PC Walker, appears to be lying lengthwise on top of or beside Mr. Byle, his high visibility clothing visible momentarily. And then there's a comment of a PC Good making her way to assist her colleagues. And the final paragraph of that section, during that 4 minutes 2 seconds period, the now deceased was restrained physically by various methods described by the officers and witnesses, was handcuffed to the front, and a set of 2 fast straps were applied to his legs. The accounts from each officer as to what he or she was doing during this time are somewhat inconsistent. PS Maxwell, that's Acting Police Sergeant Maxwell, DS Davidson, DC Connell and DI Robson can all speak to their observations, but they did not take part in the restraint.
That's correct, yes.
So looking at the top of that page 8, it appears that the Crown has set out perhaps 2 factual scenarios, 2 possibilities here. One, that an officer believed to be PC Walker appeared to be lying lengthwise on top of Mr. Byle, or that the same officer appeared to be lying beside Mr. Byle. Can you help the chair understand what it was you understood the Crown to be asking you in regard to those 2 factual possibilities?
I believe that was them, their review of the CCTV footage. Once the timeline compilation had been done, that was their interpretation of 2 possible opinions on that video, and I was asked, or I was under the impression from that, I was asked as to which one I believed was correct, or if I had a different view to express that opinion.
Thank you. There's in this letter of instruction, there was no reference to any factual hypotheses being set out, such as the type of thing that I asked you in November 2022. There's no specific question asking you what a hypothetical reasonable officer may or may not have done. And I wondered if you recollect ever having been explained to you by the Crown that they wished you to consider matters from that perspective, maybe what options were open to a hypothetical reasonable officer, rather than asking you what your view was about particular actions taken by officers on the date in question at Hayfield Road.
I don't have any recollection of that sort of terminology regarding hypothetical officer. When looking at the reasonableness of the the actions of any officer, I would always comment on those actions based against what would be the expected behaviour or the expected tactics and techniques for an officer to use in those circumstances.
Thank you. The Crown have pointed out that the witnesses and the accounts from the officers, as we see on the screen, were somewhat inconsistent.
Yes, I know.
So
I gave evidence back in November in relation to that.
you
yes.
did. And so we've heard evidence that different witnesses have said different things at different times. Do you have any recollection of the Crown ever setting out for you in any way, a table, in writing, or just in a discussion, the various different versions that had been given and asking you to comment on each individually?
I was given access to the original officers' notes and statements. What I do recall is that they were quite lacking in places. Some of them hadn't been done. Some of them had been done many, many days after the event. And I remember a discussion with Crown Office regarding the protocols of post-incident management not having been adhered to, or not having been as I would have expected them to be in relation to officers' accounts of such an incident.
And did you have concerns about the various different accounts that were in front of you in terms of statements and other materials?
Not so much the fact that they were different or inconsistent, because that is quite often expected when you have officers viewing a situation from different angles, different time frames, etc. But the fact that original accounts, initial accounts, or later referenced full accounts weren't available from the officers.
Was it ever, we've heard about something that the Crown sort of working, it was called the Core Crown Theory, something that they worked on, that they developed, a Core Crown Theory, what the Crown case was at its highest, as they would put it, and effectively what was the most prejudicial scenario for a potential officer who was involved, a potential accused. They were considering criminality. And do you remember discussing with the Crown what their Core Crown Theory was, or what the Crown case at its highest was?
I don't remember a specific conversation, but I remember being made aware of the fact that they were considering criminal, or that was one of the options open to them, was consideration of criminal proceedings, and basically a caveat that my report may be required at that level.
Right. And so you understood that you were being asked to do a report potentially for criminal proceedings.
Yes.
So you may have to be a witness in a trial in the future. Was it ever made clear to you what whether it was called a Core Crown Theory or a Crown case at highest, what the sort of factual position was for the Crown in terms of the worst sort of most prejudicial factual position? Was that ever identified for you by the Crown?
I don't remember a specific conversation regarding what charges might be brought, but I obviously being involved in a number of cases like this elsewhere, I'm aware of what the possible charges or the possible implications could be to people involved in this sort of situation, yes.
Of course, but leaving aside possible criminal charges, did the Crown clearly identify to you the worst case factually for the officers?
I don't remember having that conversation, say, other than the fact that I was made aware that criminal proceedings were a possibility.
Right. So you were aware that obviously criminal charges are the worst case scenario in many situations, but I'm interested in whether the Crown identified the facts that might merit charges of that sort.
No, I don't remember that conversation. If it was into one of the two verbal meetings.
Do you remember anything like that?
I don't have a recollection of it, no.
So in the letter of instruction, as we see at the top of page 8, you were asked to proceed on the basis that, and this relates to the Snapchat footage, that PC Walker appears to be lying lengthwise on top of Mr. Bio or beside Mr. Bio. And I think you described that earlier as that appeared to be the Crown's interpretation of the footage.
Yes.
So they've, at the very least in this letter, they've asked you to look at perhaps two possible factual scenarios. And I wondered, reflecting now where we are, when I've asked you questions in November using the prism of a hypothetical reasonable officer, and we've done that again this week, would you have found that useful as a mechanism to have the facts laid out for you and look at different scenarios?
As I say, I think I was requested, and I would always make my own judgment of the materials being presented to me. I take this sort of letter of instruction as very much a sort of a timeline based on the instructing person's view of the evidence that's in front of them, highlighting things that they might want me to focus in on. And as I said, in relation to the hypothetical officer, I would always use that level in relation to my opinion of the actions of an officer, what would be expected or what would be recognised as good practice as against what I'm actually viewing or being presented with.
Thank you. Could we go back to the report that we looked at shortly? I'd like to look at COPFS 00024. And this is your report from 13th April 2018.
Yeah.
It's a 41-page PDF. And I'd like to look at just one or two aspects of this. Page 31, letter J. It's at the bottom of the page. And here you've said, at this time there are differing accounts of the body position of Mr. Bio. PC Tomlinson, Smith and Mr. Nelson, see paragraph O below, appear to have him on his front, with PC Walker lying over his upper body. PC Walker describes this as being on his knees with his upper body over the subject's right shoulder, with him lying on his left side. So I think here you recognise there were two versions of the facts that you had identified.
Yes, and that paragraph specifically from the officer's account, not from my opinion of the or viewing of the CCTV.
No. So this isn't connected to the Snapchat. This is two versions that you've identified from the statements.
Yes, that's correct.
And the first version is from Tomlinson, Smith and Nelson, which have Mr. Bio on his front at Hayfield Road with PC Walker lying over his upper body. PC Walker, the version that he had from his statement was that he was on his knees on the pavement with his upper body over the subject's right shoulder, with him being Mr. Bio,
On his left side.
lying on his left side on the pavement. So you've identified those from the statements that you've looked at. The next letter I'd like to look at is S, page 30. And I think you've also recognised here, if we look at S, can we move further down? It's, is this, yes, at page 30, sorry, of the report. There we are. PC Walker also fell to the ground at this time, dropping the baton he'd taken from his colleague. He states he ended up on his knees next to Mr. Bio, who was on his back. So on this version here, the version appears to be PC Walker was on his knees again, but next to Mr. Bio, who was on his back on the pavement.
Yes, this
so
is
no mention there of lying over.
no. This is prior to the movement. The other paragraph you've seen is further on into the restraint. This is at the initial, from memory, without going back a little bit further. This is at the initial contact with Mr. Bio by the officers, and PC Walker was one of the first ones to engage with Mr. Bio.
Yes, I think in the original statement from PC Walker, he said Mr. Bio had landed on his back.
Yes.
On the pavement. And I wasn't able to see anything in your report which accorded with the letter of instruction, which indicated the Crown's interpretation of the Snapchat footage. And that was stated in the letter of instruction to be PC Walker lying lengthwise on top of Mr. Bio during the restraint. So that was their interpretation of that Snapchat. Did you consider that as a possible factual scenario?
I would have taken my review of the CCTV and what I saw from it, and I'm sure somewhere later on in the report there's a description of the body position as I found it to be.
Thank you. I think if we look now at K and L, so if we look at page 31 and it moves on to 32. So let's look at K, which is at the very bottom of page 31. Taking into consideration the fact that all the officers state he was struggling, he being Mr. Bio,
Yes.
struggling violently against them and was trying to get up, I would suggest that Mr. Bio moved into a number of positions, and this probably included lying at times on his front during this phase of the attempts to restrain him.
Yeah.
And was that your own interpretation of the statements that you had?
Not just the
available?
statements, but also my view of the CCTV, and my understanding and knowledge of having been involved in a number of incidents like this. The movement of the subject in those sorts of situations is quite evident.
And when you say the CCTV, we've had evidence about CCTV footage, but also from Snapchat
Yes.
footage. And was it both of those things you're referring to?
It
or-
was the forensic collaboration. I'm not sure if you've actually had that presented to you. They'd done a superimposing where they'd put one set of footage on top of the other and placed it at the same time. So you had visions of sort of multiple views or 2 or 3 views of the same incident at the same time, but from different angles.
We have all of that, as I understand it, and we've heard evidence from our own experts in relation to
Yes,
that.
and obviously what I could see was I might be able to see something from one angle or one bit of footage, but couldn't see it from the other.
Thank you. And then if we look at L, which is on the next page, 32, you say, I would also be very surprised that during this time PC Walker was not at times lying across the upper body of Mr. Bio and putting a degree of pressure onto him. I do not think this could have been sustained or prolonged pressure due to my comment in the next paragraph and continued resistance of Mr. Bio until full restraint was achieved. And the next paragraph is the one where you mentioned the bench pressing.
Yes.
Where Mr. Bio sought to lift himself, bench press himself off the ground. And you see in paragraph M, in this position, the fact that PC Walker was on his back would not have placed any pressure on his chest, Mr. Bio's chest, if this was not on the ground. And Mr. Bio would have been able to breathe in this position. You again, don't specifically address the possibility there of a factual scenario where Mr. Bio was lying. Let me just get the wording right. Lying lengthwise on top of Mr. Bio during the restraint. Why didn't you cover that possibility?
As I say, I would have, my interpretation from that, I say, you've got to remember this was done 6 years ago. My interpretation of the evidence at the time, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't have commented on it. It wasn't, although it was in my instruction letter, it wasn't part of the specific question that was asked of me. It was their interpretation, and as I said, I would have made my deliberations based on my view of the CCTV.
Thank you. And then can we look at page 38 of your report? And this is the summary of your conclusions. And I'm interested in section 8F, which is near the bottom of the page. And here you say, in relation to all the variations in body position of Mr. Bile and the officers, I would suggest this fits with my explanation as to the fluidity of the control and restraint process, and that there were indeed times when Mr. Bile was face down and the officers were at times placing pressure on him to keep him on the ground. However, I do not believe this was constant or prolonged. And is that your own personal view of what you could see on the Snapchat footage or the materials you had?
Yes, and obviously my expertise in that particular area.
And is it fair to say, Mr. Greaves, that that was a comment you made on what you thought the most likely factual scenario was?
Yes, based on my review of the evidence, yes.
Thank you. Do you remember the Crown, and in particular Ashley Edwards, when she consulted with you, exploring the possibility that they had in the letter of instruction that Ms. PC Walker was lying lengthwise on Mr. Bile?
I don't remember having that particular discussion. I remember going over various factual points within my report, and as I say, being asked additional questions.
Thank you. Could I now look at the precognition that was taken by Fiona Carnan and Alistair MacLeod on the 11th of May 2018, and that's COPFS 00041. And I appreciate this may not have been available to you.
Yes, I do.
But I'll use it as a way of asking you some questions about your recollection of events. Thank you. So if we can look, first of all, this was taken in Paisley, 11th of May 2018, between 11 in the morning and 3:30 in the afternoon. And I'd like you to look at page 7. It's 15 pages long, and I'm interested in page 7. And you'll see towards the bottom of page 7, the second last paragraph, I am asked to watch the CCTV of the restraint period, including the Snapchat one. Can you tell me what it was you were asked to watch?
Sorry, where am I?
Sorry, second last paragraph, bottom of page 7. I am asked to watch the CCTV of the restraint period, including the Snapchat one. So was that part of the precognition process that you were asked to look at the videos?
I may have reviewed the video again, but I said I'd already had access to them, so I was just seeing them again.
Do you remember if there was some sort of screen or otherwise set up for you to go through it?
I can't remember, to be honest. I just remember the meeting.
Right, all right, thank you. Can we look at page 8, please? And paragraph 3 starts, I am asked about, there we are, I am asked about what can be seen on Snapchat 1. What was your understanding of what the Crown were asking you to do there?
If we've reviewed the video footage again, asking for my opinion of the position of the officers, it continues on there. As I say, obviously this is their notes of our discussion. This looks to me like a standard position of team restraint, which would have indicated an officer on each arm, an officer at the head, and an officer securing the legs.
And it says there, it looks like one officer is lying across the legs. From reading the statements, my impression was that this was PC Tomlinson lying across the legs of Mr. Bile. And you mention the training manual. And you say, I would say that PC Tomlinson, I believe, is lying diagonally across the legs as shown in that picture. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a transcript of the words that you used. But just looking at that paragraph, does that accord with your recollection of what was being discussed at that time?
As I say, it was so long ago, I don't have a recollection. I didn't make any original notes because they were taking details of the conversation. I have no way of challenging what's on their recollection of it.
Is there anything there that makes you think, no, I definitely didn't say that?
No, it would appear to me just me making a comment on what I was being shown on the Snapchat video again.
So was it, from thinking back now, do you think that's reasonably accurate to say that is what that was your impression from the footage?
It would appear to be, yes.
And then can we look at the next paragraph where it starts, it looks like a bog standard restraint position. Do you see on floor trying to get leg restraints on? In my view, the police officer lying diagonally across legs corresponds with Tomlinson. I don't see anyone lying across the upper torso. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you remember seeing anything like that?
As I've said, I have no recollection of the actual conversation, as it was a four-hour discussion, so I'm afraid I can't help any further.
All right. So you don't, it then says there, I'm sure PC Walker was at times lying over the torso of Mr. Bile, but that's not evident in that Snapchat.
No.
So that's not something you remember seeing.
No,
so.
but as I said, I've commented on it in my report, so I've obviously seen it on one of the other bits of CCTV footage where PC Walker was across the upper body.
And then it says, I'm asked about asserting body weight as a method of restraint. It's impossible to control someone on the ground without using downward pressure. You need body weight. Even Peyton using the baton was using his body weight. I have no issue with the restraint process.
Yeah.
And if we could go down. You then say, I'm asked if I, or appear to have been discussing, I'm asked if I have any issue with Walker using his upper body weight. As described, as I said from the accounts I read, there were times when PC Walker has been on top of Mr. Bile, but then Bile bench presses. That certainly seems to accord with the comments in the report. Maybe not exact language, but do you remember talking about that aspect of your...
What I remember from the meeting was it was a review of the report, and they were asking clarification questions on a number of the sections that I'd put in the report.
And thank you. And then can we look at page 10? And it's paragraph 2. I am asked about my comments on page 10. There we are. I'm asked about my comments under the heading of other witnesses in my report. And I've been asked about 2 eyewitnesses whose evidence I've not referred to, namely Ashley Wise and Christopher Fenton. We've heard from both of them in the inquiry. I would class these 2 witnesses' evidence as what we call passing bus syndrome. Do you remember having a discussion and using the phrase passing bus syndrome?
That or the Clapham omnibus as referred to on the video. It's about somebody who drives past an incident and sees the massive police officers restraining somebody on the floor. They haven't seen the predetermined actions prior to, and they don't see the bit after. They just see that snapshot of what's going on.
And they form a view of that.
They form a view of that being excessive or irregular.
And it would appear there was some sort of discussion about that. You remember having that discussion?
As I said, I remember going through the report in detail and spending 4 hours reviewing over everything. So yeah.
And it says somebody has not seen what happened beforehand. The police are trying to do what they are trained to do. Nobody was lying on top of him. I'm asked what I made of her statement, that would be Ashley Wise, in particular about what she said about 6 police officers lying crossed over Mr. Bile. I think it was a case of passing bus. She has watched for about 10 seconds the Snapchat and then gone for a cup of tea. So does that fairly reflect your views about Ashley Wise's
As I say, I think it's a very, very small, we're talking about a 4-minute restraint or attempted restraint process, and we've got that very small bit of Snapchat, and that's the view that that individual forms their opinion of based on the length of the incident in total.
And based on your experience of cases like this, you don't, is it fair to say you don't think much of that type of evidence?
It has its place to be considered, but evidentially wise and in the view of the actual restraint process, I don't think it had a lot of weight or added anything to the review.
And then if we look at the next paragraph on the screen, I'm also asked what I made of the evidence of witness Fenton, that was Christopher Fenton, who mentioned the words scrummage or pile up. I put him in the same category as wise, e.g. a 15-second snapshot. He may have seen officers on top, but reasonable officers on top of him. You can't restrain without police on top at some point. It's unlikely to have been constant. You can't restrain without using downward pressure, but bench pressing means the person starts again when he gets a breath. And that was your understanding, is it, of the position of Christopher
Yes, that would have
Fenton?
been an answer to a specific question. Obviously, we haven't got the actual questions I was being asked. So.
There's no questions, and I appreciate it would have been more of a discussion, but this document was prepared later.
Yes.
And we don't this is the main document we have to ask you questions about. So I appreciate you've not seen this before. But do you remember looking at that now, and I appreciate it wasn't prepared by you, it's not been signed by you, but does it accord with your recollection of the discussion that you had?
As I said, I remember the discussion being around the content of my report and being asked various questions in relation to clarifying pieces of it, and additional questions which would appear from some of these additional questions around my views on the witnesses and the evidence that I'd been given. So, as I said, I can't, without the actual question to contextualise it, I can't really tell you any further.
I'm really asking these questions primarily to focus on the actions of the Crown and the Precknosers, because we've heard evidence from Fiona Carnan and Ashley Edwards, and it's hopefully helpful to the Chair to also have your recollection of events. So can I ask, do you remember if either of the Precknosers during this process said to you they didn't want you to dismiss any of the evidence or comment on any of the evidence, but to assume that certain factual positions were true?
Not from my recollection. As I said, I reviewed all of the evidence and formed an opinion on how helpful it was, and that would appear to be me giving my opinion as to how helpful that was in the review.
Thank you. Do you remember, as part of the precognition process, either of the Precknosers asking you to express a view on the facts that PC Walker was lying lengthwise on top of Mr. Bayou during the restraint?
I don't remember that question, unless it's going to pop up in this document. I don't remember specifically being asked that.
Well, I'd like to think I've fairly reflected comments that may have been akin to that. I think at one point we just looked at the second paragraph there, and the comment noted by you is nobody was lying on top of him. So it would suggest that perhaps that wasn't discussed, but if you have a different recollection, please tell me.
That specific question, I have no recollection of that specific question, no.
Thank you. And another possible factual scenario is on the basis of what Christopher Fenton saw, that there was some sort of pile-up. We've heard evidence about that being described or described as a scrummage, like a rugby scrum. Do you remember anyone at the precognition saying to you, assume that is true, assume that is what happened?
No recollection of that, no.
I'd like to ask you now about the consultation with Ashley Edwards and Les Brown. And that was the one that took place in London on the 20th of August,
Scottish House,
2018 at Scottish House. Now, I know that you won't have seen these consultation notes either, but we can have them on the screen. COPFS 02337. Now, these are 3.5 pages long, and we've heard evidence about this from Ashley Edwards. There is nothing in these notes that indicates that a factual scenario was discussed with you where PC Walker was lying lengthwise over Mr. Bayo. But do you have any recollection at all of that meeting with the allocated AD, Ashley Edwards and Les Brown, where you were asked to express a view on that possible factual scenario?
I don't have a good memory of that, of the content of the meeting. I just remember the meeting with the two individuals. So a couple of hours, possibly 3, I think.
Do you remember anything about
Not particularly,
discussing?
no. I just remember being asked lots of, again, additional questions. Some questions similar to what I'd been asked up in Paisley, and then other questions. And I think it was this, from recollection, it was this meeting where the criminal prosecution was raised in relation to why I was having a second meeting, sort of soon after the other one.
The first one being the recognition from Fiona Carney
in May, yes.
and Alistair MacLeod. Do you remember if, as part of this consultation, there was ever an opportunity taken by Ashley Edwards or Les Brown to set out the different factual hypotheses?
Not from memory, no.
Do you remember any discussions about exploring the limits of what a reasonable response would be from a hypothetical reasonable officer?
I have no recollection of it. As I say, if it's later on in this document, I'll be happy to review it.
Do you remember any mention being made of a core Crown theory or the Crown case at its highest?
No, as I said, I just remember it was either this meeting or the one in Edinburgh, the discussion around the possibility of criminal prosecution.
Do you remember any discussion about thinking about the most prejudicial factual scenario?
No.
I asked Miss Edwards in evidence about the speed at which the officers elected to use force against Mr. Bayo, and whether she had painted for you a factual hypothesis and asked you to consider that and say whether the hypothetical reasonable officer would have elected to use force within that timescale. Now, what recollection, if any, do you have about discussing the speed at which force was elected to be used?
I don't remember discussing, I'm not saying it didn't happen, I don't remember have any recollection of that discussion. I remember commenting on it within my report, my original report, in relation to the initial contact with Mr. Bayo by the officers.
I mean, there's nothing about that in the notes
No.
that we have, but I was wondering if you had any memory of that.
No recollection, no.
And do you remember Miss Edwards saying at this consultation that she wished you not to express your own views on the factual position?
I don't remember that conversation, no. At the end of the day, I'm designed to be an independent opinion to assist the investigator, the panel, to make that informed decision.
I don't want to give you the impression that Ashley Edwards has told the inquiry she did say that to you, because she said she didn't remember whether she had asked you to avoid expressing your own views on the facts. And there's certainly no statement in the consultation notes we have that would suggest she had. So I was just simply asking if you remembered that.
I don't remember being asked that, no.
Do you remember Miss Edwards asking you not to express any views on medical matters?
No, don't remember that. I made clear in my report that I'm not a medical expert, but obviously that I have comment in relation to what is known by the police and what we train officers in regarding the medical conditions, to pass that on and what our understanding is of how it affects or is affected within a restraint process.
Thank you very much. Could you give me a moment, please, Mr. Graves? Mr. Graves, thank you so much. I have no further questions.
Are there any Rule 9 applications? Should be. Mr. Graves, thank you very much for coming back to give further evidence to the inquiry. I'm very conscious that we've taken up quite a lot of your time in 2 phases. The inquiry is about to adjourn now, and then you'll be free to go.
Thank you very much, sir. I
So
hope
the
it's been
inquiry will
helpful.
adjourn until Tuesday at 10 o'clock.